When I shared the exciting news about my scholarship, my stepdad, full of anger, tore my scholarship letter and kicked me out of the house. After 13 years, we met again at the diner, and he threw a glass at me, laughed, and said, "Clean this up, sweeper." Unaware of my position, I called security. He turned pale, and I laughed at him. Then suddenly, they say life has a way of testing you. And looking back now, I think my test began the day my dad passed away. I was only 14 years old, and everything I knew about stability and love disappeared in an instant. My dad, a school bus driver, was my rock, the one who always encouraged me, who told me I could do anything if I worked hard enough. But that morning, one terrible car accident took him away from me and my mom forever. At first, my mom, Linda, tried to hold it together. She was always a strong woman. She had to be, working as a receptionist and managing our household. But grief changes people. She became quieter, more withdrawn. The bills piled up, and I could see the strain in her eyes. She started working longer hours, taking every extra shift she could find. I knew she was doing her best for us, but we barely spoke anymore. It was like the light in our little house on Park Street in Denver had gone out. About a year later, she came home one evening with an announcement that turned my world upside down. "Scarlett," she said, avoiding my eyes, "I've met someone. His name is Mark." Mark Miller entered our lives like a whirlwind. At first, he seemed nice enough, a polished insurance agent with a confident smile and a firm handshake. He had a son, James, who was 7 at the time, and they moved into our house within a few months of meeting my mom. That's when everything began to change. At first, I tried to adjust, I really did, but it became clear very quickly that I didn't fit into this new family dynamic. My mom, who once used to ask me about my day and listen to my dreams, now spent all her time fussing over James. He was the golden boy, the center of her attention, and I was just there. Mark, on the other hand, made it clear that he didn't care for me. He had this way of making me feel small with just a look or a comment. "Scarlett, how do you not know how to fix a leaky faucet at your age? You should be more useful around the house," he'd say, shaking his head in disappointment. Then there was his mother, Mrs. Miller, who seemed to live at our house half the time. She was an expert at finding flaws in everything I did. How I sat, how I talked, even how I ate. "Scarlett, don't slouch," she'd snap, pinching my shoulder. "Stop chewing like that. No wonder you're not invited anywhere." It was unbearable. The only escape I had was babysitting for a neighbor, Lisa. She had a little girl named Ava, who was 3 years old with the sweetest giggle you'd ever hear. Ava adored me, and Lisa always treated me like I mattered. "You're so good with her, Scarlett," Lisa would say. "You've got a real knack for this." Babysitting became my safe haven, the one place where I felt appreciated. By the time I turned 16, I was desperate for some independence. I started picking up odd jobs, dog walking, running errands for neighbors, even grocery shopping for an elderly woman down the street. Every dollar I earned went straight into a little tin box I kept under my bed. After months of saving, I finally bought myself a second-hand tablet to help with schoolwork. I'll never forget the day Mark found it. I'd left it charging on the kitchen counter, and when he saw it, his face darkened. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, holding it up like it was contraband. "I bought it," I said, keeping my voice steady. "With my own money." Mark scoffed. "Your money? And you didn't think to ask? That's selfish. Scarlett, James could use this for his homework." Before I could protest, he handed the tablet to James, who grinned like he'd won the lottery. I felt the tears prick my eyes, but I swallowed them down. Crying wouldn't change anything. That night, I told my teacher, Miss Roberts. What had happened? She listened, her face soft with understanding, and promised to speak to my mom. The next day, my mom returned the tablet to me, but not without a lecture. You need to stop causing trouble, Scarlett, she said. Mark's trying his best, and you need to meet him halfway. Trouble? That's what she thought I was. From that moment on, I knew I had to find a way out. I threw myself into my schoolwork, spending late nights studying just to avoid the chaos of the living room. I applied to every scholarship I could find, desperate for a way to escape. And then, one day, the letter arrived, a partial scholarship to a college in Boulder. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. For the first time in years, I felt like I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. I told my family the news at dinner, my voice shaky with excitement. But instead of congratulations, Mark exploded. You made this decision without consulting me. He yelled. You live under my roof, eat my food, and you think you can just do whatever you want? I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. Before I knew it, he had the letter in his hands, tearing it into pieces. You're ungrateful, he said, his voice ice cold. If you think you're so grown up, then go. Get out of my house. My mom just sat there, silent. She didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me. That was the night I packed my things and left, my heart breaking with every step. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. That night, as I left the house with nothing but a small backpack, I felt like I was stepping into the unknown. The streets of Denver were quiet, the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows. I had no real plan, just a phone with Sophie's number saved in it and a desperate hope that she'd answer. When Sophie picked up, I could barely get the words out through my tears. I can't stay there anymore, I choked. Can I come over? Quote, of course, Sophie said, her voice steady and reassuring. Come here now. We'll figure everything out. By the time I reached Sophie's small apartment, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. She opened the door and immediately pulled me into a hug. You're safe now, she said, guiding me inside. I told her everything. How Mark tore up my scholarship letter. How my mom didn't defend me. How I felt like I didn't belong in my own family. Sophie listened quietly, her face dark with anger as I spoke. After I finished, she said, you deserve better, Scarlett. You deserve people who support you. And I think I know someone who can help. That's how I met George. Sophie's uncle George owned a small diner in downtown Denver. It wasn't much to look at, just a little place with chipped red booths and a neon open sign that flickered on and off. But it felt warm and welcoming. When Sophie introduced me to George, I could tell right away that he was different. He had a calm, steady presence, the kind that made you feel like everything would be okay. I heard you're looking for a fresh start, George said, leaning against the counter. I nodded. I'll do anything. I just need a chance. Well, he said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, I could use some extra help around here. You'd start as a server. And there's a little room upstairs you can stay in until you're on your feet. It's not much, but it's clean and quiet. I couldn't believe it. A place to stay and a job? It was more than I could have hoped for. Thank you, I said, my voice shaking. I won't let you down. The first few weeks at the diner were tough. I had never worked in food service before, and I was constantly on my feet, balancing trays of food, refilling coffee cups, and cleaning tables. But George was patient, teaching me the ins and outs of running a diner. He showed me how to take inventory, manage the register, and handle difficult customers. You've got potential, kid, he said one night after closing. You're a hard worker, and that's half the battle in this business. Hearing those words from George meant the world to me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was good at something, like I had a purpose. During the day, I worked at the diner. And at night I studied. I had contacted the college in Boulder and explained my situation. They allowed me to reapply for the scholarship. And by some miracle, I got it again. With George's support, I managed to juggle my classes and my job. Even if it meant sleeping only a few hours a night, Sophie was my rock through it all. She'd stop by the diner after her culinary classes, sharing tips and ideas for recipes. You know, she said one evening as we experimented with new sandwich options, we could really turn this place into something special one day. It was a crazy thought at the time. George's diner was small, and we were barely breaking even most months. But the idea planted itself in my mind, a tiny seed of hope for the future. Over the next few years, George became more than just a boss. He became a mentor. He taught me everything he knew about running a business. From negotiating with vendors to creating a menu that people couldn't resist. By the time I graduated college, I was handling the diner's day-to-day operations. George, who was nearing retirement, sat me down one day and said, "Scarlett, I've been doing this for 30 years. I think it's time I hand over the reins. What do you think about taking over the place?" Quote, I was stunned. Me? Quote, are you sure? He said with a smile. You've earned it. Sophie and I took over the diner not long after that. It wasn't easy at first. There were so many long nights and tough decisions. But we worked as a team. Together, we transformed George's little diner into something new. Something uniquely ours. We modernized the menu, updated the decor, and started hosting community events. Little by little, the diner grew. Word spread about our food and friendly atmosphere. And soon we had regulars who couldn't get enough of our signature dishes. By the time I turned 29, we had expanded into a chain of diners across Denver. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. I had built something from the ground up, something no one could take away from me. But just when I thought I had left my past behind, life had one more challenge in store for me. Life had finally settled into something that felt like a dream. The diners were thriving. Sophie and I were closer than ever. And I had created a life that I was proud of. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. But life has a way of testing you, even when you think the hardest parts are behind you. My past came crashing back into my life one Friday evening when I least expected it. It was a typical busy night at the original diner, the one Sophie and I had taken over from George. The tables were full, the kitchen was buzzing, and the scent of burgers and fresh pie filled the air. Sophie was in the back managing the kitchen staff while I was making rounds in the dining area, greeting customers and checking on their meals. That's when I saw them. Sitting at a large table in the corner was my mother, Linda. Next to her sat Mark, looking as smug and arrogant as ever. And beside him, James, now a grown man, laughing with a group of people I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. I froze for a moment, my mind racing. What were they doing here? I hadn't seen or spoken to them in years. And yet here they were, in my diner of all places. I wanted to walk away, to hide in the kitchen until they left. But something inside me refused to back down. Taking a deep breath, I walked over to their table, keeping my expression neutral. Good evening, I said, my voice steady. Welcome to our diner. Is everything to your liking? Quote, Mark's head snapped up, and for a moment, I saw confusion flicker across his face. Then recognition set in, and his smirk returned. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair. If it isn't little Scarlett, I didn't realize you worked here. What happened? Couldn't make it in the real world? Quote, I ignored the jab, keeping my professional demeanor intact. I'm the owner of this diner, I said calmly. If there's anything you need, feel free to let me know. Mark's smirk faltered for a split second, but then he laughed aloud. A mocking sound that made my skin crawl. The owner? He said, shaking his head. Sure, Scarlett. Whatever helps you sleep at night. I glanced at my mom, hoping for some acknowledgement, some sign that she was proud of what I'd accomplished. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. James, now engaged to the woman sitting beside him, was too busy showing off to his friends to even notice me. I turned to leave, hoping to put as much distance between myself and their table as possible. But Mark wasn't done. Hey, Scarlett, he called out, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the other diners. Why don't you grab us some refills and maybe clean this table while you're at it? Quote, I felt my hands clench into fists. But I forced myself to stay calm. I'll have one of my staff do that, I said. And turned away. That's when it happened. I heard the sound of a glass being thrown. And before I could react, water splashed across my back. Mark's laughter echoed behind me. Oops, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Guess I made a mess. Better clean that up, Scarlett. That's all you're good for, isn't it? Quote, the room went silent. Every customer and staff member was watching, waiting to see what I would do. My heart was pounding, my cheeks burning with anger and humiliation. Before I could say anything, Sophie appeared by my side, her expression calm but deadly serious. She turned to Mark and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, you should know that Scarlett is the co-owner of this diner, as well as the entire chain. Your behavior is unacceptable, and we have a zero-tolerance policy for abusive customers. Mark's face turned pale. He looked around, realizing for the first time that everyone in the diner was staring at him. His smugness evaporated, replaced by embarrassment. I straightened my shoulders and found my voice. Staff, please call security, I said, my tone firm. Mr. Miller and his party are no longer welcome here. Escort them out immediately. The security team, who we kept on call for large events, arrived within minutes. They escorted Mark, Linda, and James out of the diner as the rest of the guests watched in stunned silence. My mother didn't say a word to me. She simply followed Mark out, her head down. The tension in the room eased once they were gone. And one by one, the customers resumed their meals. Sophie placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You handled that like a pro, she said. But I didn't feel like a pro. My hands were still shaking as I went to the back office to compose myself. For years, I had dreamed of confronting Mark, of showing him how far I'd come. But in that moment, all I felt was sadness. The past wasn't as far behind me as I had thought. That night, after Mark and my family were escorted out of the diner, I sat alone in the office. I thought about everything that had just happened. His smug comments, the way he mocked me in front of my customers and staff, and my mom's silence. I thought I had moved past it all. But the truth was, their actions still hurt. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I couldn't let them undo everything I had built. This diner, this life, it was mine, and no one could take it from me. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of notifications on my phone. Apparently, Mark and Linda hadn't wasted any time spinning their version of the story. Mark had posted on social media, calling me ungrateful and claiming that I had ruined James's engagement celebration by kicking them out for no reason. My mom chimed in, writing that I had humiliated the family and that I was bitter and vindictive. At first, I felt anger bubbling up again. But then Sophie knocked on my door, holding her phone. You need to see this, she said. She showed me the security footage from the diner. George had installed a state-of-the-art camera system years ago, and it captured everything that had happened. Mark throwing the glass, his mocking comments, and the moment I calmly asked the staff to escort him out. I think it's time people saw the truth, Sophie said. I hesitated. Posting the footage would expose everything. the ugly truth about my family and how they treated me. But it would also protect my business and my reputation. After a long moment, I nodded. Post it, I said. Sophie uploaded the video to our diner's social media accounts with a simple caption. We have a zero-tolerance policy for abusive behavior toward our staff or owners. This is what happened at last night's event. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the video had gone viral. Comments flooded in, with people expressing their support for me and their outrage at Mark's behavior. I can't believe anyone would act like that in a public place, one person wrote. This owner handled it so professionally. Props to her, said another. As the video gained traction, local news outlets picked up the story. Soon, headlines like, Denver diner owner stands up to abusive customer, were everywhere. The attention brought in even more customers, and our diners saw a spike in business. But the fallout for my family was swift. Mark's employer, embarrassed by his behavior, quietly demoted him. James's fiance's family canceled the engagement party venue they had booked, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. And Mrs. Miller, well, she became an internet meme. A still shot of her shocked face as she was escorted out of the diner spread like wildfire, with captions like, when you realize you messed with the wrong person. A few days later, I got a phone call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Scarlett, my mom's voice said, soft and pleading. Can we talk? Quote, what is there to talk about? I asked, keeping my voice steady. About what happened, she said. You didn't have to post that video. Mark could lose his job because of this. Do you know what kind of stress you've caused us? Quote, I felt a surge of anger. What kind of stress I've caused you? I repeated. Do you have any idea what you and Mark have put me through? You stood by and watched while he tore me down over and over again. And now you want me to feel guilty? I don't owe you anything. Mom, not anymore. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I just wanted us to be a family. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. We were a family, Mom, before Mark, but you chose him over me. Over and over again. And now I've built a life without you in it. I hung up before she could say anything else. The social media posts from my family stopped after that. Probably because the truth was out there for everyone to see. As the weeks went by, the video faded from the spotlight, but its impact lingered. I pinned it to the top of our diner page, not as a way to dwell on the past, but as a reminder to myself and to others that standing up for yourself is always worth it. As I look back now, I realize that moment in the diner wasn't just about Mark or my family. It was about reclaiming my voice and finally letting go of the pain they caused me. Sometimes walking away isn't about giving up. It's about protecting yourself. I used to think that success meant proving something to the people who hurt me. But now I know that success is about building a life that makes you proud. No matter what anyone else thinks. Today, the diners are thriving. Sophie and I are planning to expand even further. And I finally feel free. My story isn't one of reconciliation, but it is one of resilience. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I'll never let anyone make me feel small again.